Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Stealth Hitch with the towing package on a 2019 BMW X7. Now you may be saying to yourself, I don't see the hitch, and that's because it lives up to the name Stealth by having a separate receiver that you drop in place only when you need it. So that way when you don't need your hitch for your accessories, or if you're putting your ball mount to tow, it can look completely stock, and that's kind of the glory of it. You retain that OEM look but still get the usability of a hitch. Now when you are ready to put on some accessories like a bike rack or cargo carrier, you're going to use this receiver here. Now this isn't to be used with a ball mount, and that's where you have the ball mount separate attachment for. Now you just simply twist the handle and then push this up. It's going to lock in place, and then you can actually lock it with your key here by pushing in that tumbler, and that way this stays in place. No one's going to walk away with it. And this is rated at a 600-pound tongue weight, so that's going to be a decent amount of weight for your bike racks or cargo carriers. You should be able to load them up pretty well. And when you are ready to tow, there's no problem to just simply twist this, drop this out, swap over to your ball mount, and then just simply push up, hear that snap, and then you're ready to hook up to your trailer. Now this one is actually rated pretty well at 8,000 pounds gross trailer weight rating, so that's a decent amount of weight. You're going to want to check the vehicle's owner's manual obviously before towing that much, but you also have a tongue weight rating of 800 pounds on this. Now your safety chain loops are actually kind of hidden as well, but you still have them kind of just tucked up here. You can see where you're able to loop into place. And when picking up the towing package, you also get a 7-pull, so you can hook up to your trailer wiring. Now, installation is a little bit tricky. As far as the hitch, it's not that bad, but if you are doing the wiring portion, Mars had the battery up in the front, which does make for a little bit lengthy process of running those wires, and you might want to be slightly mechanically inclined before jumping into this one, but I'm going to walk you through every step. So if you want to watch the video and determine whether or not it's right for you, let's look at that now. We'll begin our installation. We're going to open up our hatch here, and we're going to pull these panels out. Now it's just a little push down button here. It's just a push down button here, and this should slide out. So we're going to go ahead and do that on both sides. Now we're going to be accessing a 10mm nut that's going to be holding our taillight in, and it's pretty far back, so I'm using a long extension here. It's going to look like this. It's got a washer attached to it. Now during the whole installation, I highly recommend having a place to keep all your hardware. It's going to make reinstallation a lot easier. So now that we have this one off, we'll go ahead and do the same on the passenger side. Now we're going to want to remove the cover that goes in between the hatch and the taillight, and it's just 2 clips that kind of hold it in place. So if you just kind of use your fingers to pry there, you should be able to get those to pop out, and you can see where those clips are. We'll go ahead and set these aside. That's going to gain us access to these T30 Torx bits holding the taillight in, so we're going to go ahead and get those taken out and removed. Now it is going to be pretty tight here, so I'm just using a small ratchet with a T30 Torx bit. So we'll go ahead and get these removed. Now your taillight should come out pretty easy with that hardware removed. There is a tab here where we took that 10mm nut off, so just slide that out. And then we're just going to go ahead and unplug our taillight here. So we have this locking clip. We'll just pull that out, and then we should be able to just push this tab in, get that separated, and then we can set our taillight aside. So go ahead and do this on the other side as well. So now we're going to be peeling back this fender well liner here, and so this plastic piece, don't pull it back too much because it'll leave a crease. You're going to want to be kind of gentle here. There's going to be a series of clips, and we're going to pull it back to about here, and that way we can gain access to the 8mm screws that are holding on the fascia. Now I'm using a trim panel tool. If you don't have one of these, you could probably find an old credit card or a library card or whatever, something you're not using, and that's going to work well, because the way that these clips work, it helps to kind of get in between them and start at the bottom here. We should be able to get this one to kind of pop, and that's going to give us enough access here to find the next clip. And what I do is kind of just wedge this in between again, so be careful because you are kind of rubbing against your paint, but pulling on those clips is you don't want to break them. So putting that pressure there pushes this tab down and allows it to slide out. So just kind of work your way up, and then when you get to the next clip, you kind of just push this in and kind of put a downward pressure as you pull out, and that should separate it. There we go. So now you can see we have our 8mm screws, so we'll go ahead and get those removed. And then we're going to repeat on the other side as well. I've gone ahead and put some painter's tape here. I'm also going to run it along this body line, and the main thing is when we pull this fascia off, that rubbing of clear coat against clear coat can kind of scratch it, and so can these clips. So this is just going to give us a layer of protection. That way it's not going to be scratching when we take it off, but also when we put it back on. Next, we're going to be removing our rear reflectors, as there's a bolt there that holds the fascia on. Now these are notoriously tricky and can break pretty easily, so I'm going to show you. I got the other one out, and you'll have your clip here that snaps in. That's going to be right there, and then as we kind of make our way over, this kind of locks into place. So when you pry this back, you're going to want to open it up this way. Don't pry on this end because that will crack it. So the trick here, just kind of be very gentle and get a nice easy edge. Don't put it right at the corner. You don't want to chip it. So just kind of take your time here. And once you get that first one, it's not too bad from there. But try to get behind the reflector, because if you put it on the edge here, those tend to chip off pretty easy. So once you have that gap, you kind of just work your way down. And you'll see some gaps under there. Just kind of pry away there. And there you go. That should pop out like that. So again, just take your time here. Don't pry too hard. Just try to get that gap and then work your way down. And then you're going to see we have an 8mm screw there. So we'll get that removed. So now you're going to want to head underneath your fascia, and there's going to be 23 8mm screws. So just kind of follow along the edge. Just make sure you're getting all of them. And this is going to allow that fascia to come off. So just make sure you get them all and hold on to all of them. Now you'll see once you kind of get quite a few of them taken off from each side, it is going to kind of come off in sections. So just make sure you set these aside and have them ready for later installation. Now there's going to be a total of 3 panels, so we have one on each side that looks like this, and then also our center panel. So we're also going to need to remove our 8mm here that were by the taillights. There's going to be one on each side, so go ahead and get that removed. Now you're going to want to grab an extra set of hands and also have a place set aside to put your fascia, and that way it doesn't get damaged. Now we're going to be starting at the corners here, pulling these back along the clips. There's also going to be 4 clips along this center portion, so you're going to want this tailgate kind of just at a 45-degree angle. That way we can access those. Now there's also going to be an electrical connector, so don't just pull the fascia out. You don't want to damage those wires. So just kind of pull along the corner here. That's going to get those clips to pop pretty easily, and then just work your way over. Now if you do get caught up on a clip, you can pry on the little tab there and that should separate it, but holding that pressure against it's going to make it a little bit easier. So as far as the center clips go, you can see it's kind of latched in here. So they say to use an Allen wrench. You can push this little tab in. So if you have a nice little 90-degree, you can push those. But again, you're going to want to keep that pressure against it, and that way it can pop past that clip. We're just pushing that tab and then just kind of pulling back, so you can kind of hear that separate. So just work your way down. Again, keeping that pressure so they don't snap back in place. So just be gentle here, but we'll kind of get this popped loose and just kind of wiggle it a little bit sometimes, and that's going to help. Now you can see we do have our electrical connector on the passenger side, so we'll go ahead and get that separated. It's just going to be a tab that will press. Now sometimes they can get tricky as they get dust built up in them, so just take your time, get that separated, and then you're able to set your fascia aside. We're going to need to remove the 2 side panels here, and that's going to give us access to our bolts on the bumper beam. Now there's 2 plastic push pins here. They say to use a pick. Just be careful. Obviously you don't want to scratch your tailgate, but I'm going to use a trim panel tool. You can see a slot. You're just going to pry up on the center part of that push button, and then you should be able to remove it. The one that's in here, again, be careful. It's kind of tucked back there, so if you slip you might scratch your tailgate, so just take your time. We'll get that removed. And then there's also a 10mm, so you'll lower your tailgate all the way down, and with an extension you should be able to get to that. And then with that taken out, this should kind of just pop out of place. It kind of slides into those, but now we have full access to these bolts. We're going to go ahead and do the same on the other side. Now our exhaust hanger bracket is attached to our bumper beam, and the bumper beam is going to be coming off, so we need to go ahead and remove that. And it's going to be a 13mm socket. Now on the passenger side, you have the wiring that is attached to the bumper beam just with a plastic clip. So with a trim panel tool or a flathead, just go ahead and get that separated. And we have our kick sensor bracket here that has all our wiring attached, and it's just going to be 5 plastic push pins. So we'll go ahead and get those removed. And then we can kind of just set this aside. Just make sure it's not pulling the wires here. So just rest it somewhere where it's not going to have stress on it. So now we're going to need to remove the 8 nuts that are holding on our bumper reinforcement bar. Now this is not going back on the vehicle. We are going to retain the hardware. There's also going to be a spacer behind this that we need to keep in place. We can use the same nuts that we just took off. We'll grab our hitch, slide this over our studs. And I'm just going to hand tighten on my hardware for now. Now on our bottom studs, before we put those nuts on, we need to go ahead and grab our bracket. And the tab's going to face towards the rear of the vehicle, and it's going to create our mounting spot for our exhaust hangers. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of hand tighten these on. And we're going to do this for both sides. I want to attach the exhaust hangers because this has a little bit of room to kind of wiggle back and forth before tightening it down. We want our exhaust to sit nice and even on both sides. So I'll go ahead and get this attached. So you have your tab that fits in the front one. And then we're going to take the hardware included in the kit. So we have our bolt, a flat washer. That's going to go on this side. We'll feed this up. And then we have our serrated flange nut here, and I'm going to go ahead and get this tightened down, and I'm going to do this on both sides, and then we can come back and tighten down these bolts here, and that way we know our exhaust is not under any stress one way or the other. So using a 13mm, I'll just push down on that serrated nut to kind of hold that in place. We'll tighten that up, and I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. So now we can go back, tighten down all of our nuts, and then we're going to come back with a torque wrench and make sure that they're torqued down properly. Now I'm using the torque setting found in the instruction manual, and if you need a torque wrench, we have these available here at eTrailer. And this is just going to make sure that we don't have too much stress on our threads, but also it's not going to become loose over time. So just go through, torque these down all properly. Can put our side panels back on, so make sure you get that 10mm nut and those 2 plastic push pins in place, and these kind of just slide into the plastic. So again, just kind of get everything lined up. Now if you're doing just the rack receiver kit, it's going to be pretty easy. We're going to take our receiver block and we're just going to pass our bolts through here and then finish them up with the nylon lock nuts. But if you're doing the towing kit, it's going to get a little bit different. You're going to want to open up the box that has all your wiring accessories, and we're going to go ahead and take this and just kind of rotate it until you get your safety chain loop around the handle here. And what we're going to do is put the block in the hitch, and the safety chain loop will be on the outside. We'll then pass our bolt through. Might take a little bit of wiggling to get this to all line up. But with those passed through, we can then take our other safety chain loop and make sure that the safety chain loop is faced towards the front of the vehicle. And then this is just going to slide over here. And then we also have our Z bracket here, which is going to allow us to mount up our wiring later on. So this needs to get bolted on as well. And that's just going to slide here. Slotted side should be facing vertical. And then we'll just finish this up with our nylon lock nuts. Now we'll get these tightened and torqued down. So you're going to need a wrench, a 15/16 on the head of the bolt, and then on the nut side we'll take our 15 by 16 socket and get these tightened. And just like our other hardware, we're going to torque this down to the manufacturer's recommendation in the instruction manual. There's going to be some wiring involved, so we're going to start by checking to see where our battery is located. And on this vehicle, there's two different possible locations. The first one is going to be potentially in this rear cargo carrier area. And I'm going to start by twisting these little screws, plastic here. Now we have a spare tire. That leads me to believe that we are going to have our battery up in the engine compartment. But we are going to be running wires across here, so I'm going to go ahead and also take these out. There's just going to be a series of plastic push pins to get these out, and that's going to allow us to get our module as well as all of our wires nice and clean in here. Now our battery is located in the engine bay. You can see it's kind of tucked up here. There's this panel that you can unlock to gain access to it. Now here's our module, and there's lots of wires coming off of it, and I've gone ahead and routed our power wire, and I'll show you the connections for all of them. But while we're here, let's kind of break this down. You are going to find that you have a blue and purple wire already coiled up, and that's because this is going to be for surge brakes, or if you ever want to add a brake controller, you're going to tie into those wires. Now this style of module does not use this red wire for our brake lights, so I've gone ahead and also taped that up with it, and that way we can later zip tie that up and get it out of the way. Now that leaves us, we have our green wire, that's going to be our right turn signal. That red I already kind of attached with our spool here. Our yellow I've routed across, and I just lifted this center panel. There's going to be two Torx bits. They're T15s, and that's just going to pop up and allow us to run our wires in the carpet and make our way over to our left turn signal. So I still have the wire loose. I'll show you the connection, but pretty much just running this across to keep it nice and clean. Now our brown is going to be our running lights, and that's going to be tying into our taillight wiring up here with the right turn signal. So our brown and green I just kind of have up here. Now we also have a white wire, which is going to be a ground wire, and I've attached that in here. I looked for a factory ground. Normally you can find a 10mm nut on a ground stud. I ended up using the fork spade terminal connector. I just cut my white wire, attached that, and then there's a 10mm nut that was holding on. It looks like a fuse plate or something along those lines, but it is attached to metal, so I've gone ahead and just tightened it down there, and that way we have a secure ground. Now we also have our large insulated wires as well as our black wire that we had to run through our grommet. Now coming off of our module, we also have our insulated wires here, which is going to run over to our 7-pole eventually, and then also our black wire that needs to run to power on the battery. So that has to run up the vehicle. Now we passed it through this grommet, and there's dimples on the grommet to drill through, but a lot of times the wires kind of kink over here, and if you just drill through, there's a good chance you're going to hit those wires. So what I do is I pry this grommet out. It might take a little bit, but you should be able to get it to pop out, and that way you can actually see the wires on the back. You can see a whole bundle of them there, and you really don't want to nick those with the drill. It could make for a bad time. So just drill this out large enough to pass these wires through, as well as this black power wire. And then I'm going to trace the black power wire up to the battery and show you how I got it there. Now when running your wires, you're going to want to make sure that you stay away from suspension, moving parts, or any hot exhaust. And also I found with this kit, if your battery is up in the engine bay, you're going to need to extend that wiring more than what they supply you with. And you can pick up extra wire here at eTrailer. So unfortunately it's quite a bit short, but I just went ahead and routed this over behind our heat shield. And I just kind of made some attachment points here as I went over the rear cross member, really trying to make sure to follow some factory wiring. And I made my way up here, and here you can see the butt connector that I use, which is a heat shrink. Now we also sell those here at eTrailer, and they're really good because once you crimp that down, you heat it up, it's going to seal that up, making a watertight seal. Normal butt connector is not going to seal that up, and that can cause your wires to be brittle and break over time. Now, as far as wiring, I probably added, I'd say a good 8 foot should be enough, somewhere along those lines to make it all the way up. And again, I just followed some existing lines. In fact, I found the red power wire that runs from the back all the way to the front, so I used that one as kind of a guide, and I shot it over to the right of the fuel tank to make it a little bit easier to run the rest of the wires. I pulled off some of the fasteners here, which was a series of 8mm and also some 10mm plastic nuts, but there's some nice little hangers here that they weren't being used, so I just put the wire in there and then zip tied them up, and that way it stays up and safe. Plus, when we have this back up, it should keep it all protected. So I just went ahead, made my way all the way up, and you can still see the red power wire. I kind of ran this next to it. I tried to find a nice clean path to go up to the battery box, but it wasn't that easy to say the least. So what I did is I passed it through the tunnel here where the exhaust is, but there is a bracket that I made sure to zip tie. That way, if over time it becomes loose, it's not going to make contact with the exhaust and burn. Now, to pull the wire up, I used a fish wire technique. I just used extra airline tube that we had around the shop. You can use a stick or a wire coat hanger or something along those lines to feed that down, tape it up, and then you can pull that up. So now let's head up and I'll show you how I ran the rest of it and made my connection. So from feeding it up in the engine bay, I found a few spots to zip tie it to keep it close against the firewall tunnel, and that way again it's not making contact with the engine. I then fed my power wire up through here, zip tied it to this cross brace where you have weather stripping that you can feed your wires through, and then I just made my way over before connecting to my fuse holder. Now, you don't want to disconnect the vehicle from power, so what I did is I loosened this up, and that way it stays actually contained still and hooked up to power, and I took the ring terminal and just cut a little section to be able to slide that in like a fork spade terminal, and then tighten that down. Now I'm going to keep my fuse out of the fuse holder until I have everything completely connected. That way we don't have power going through it. And then I just took, as you can see, the butt connector included with the kit, or that was already attached to the fuse holder, and just crimped that down on my power wire. Now we're going to focus on hooking up our taillight wires, and I'll show you the passenger side. That way you get an idea of how to make the connection. Now, to make this easier, there's a bunch of wires back here, and you want to make sure that you're grabbing the right one. I actually passed my grommet, so where we unplugged our taillight, I pushed this in, and that way I know for sure that I have the proper wires. Now, there is this insulation here, and it's kind of a sticky mess, but if you can cut this back, we're looking for our green and blue wire. So kind of separate that out from the others. And we're going to be using a splice connector here. So the way this works, there's metal, and we're going to put the wires in place, and when we bite this down, it's going to bite past the insulation and make contact with the wire, and then we can clamp this down and we'll be good to go. So we'll take our yellow wire here and try not to make it too close to the grommet, and I would leave a little bit of extra yellow wire so you have some room as we put this grommet back in place. So I'm just going to take my green and blue wire, and it should kind of just pop in place. You can push that down a little bit, but you want it nice and centered up. And then our yellow is going to do the same thing here. And just make sure that they stay in those channels while doing this. You don't want it to pop out. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to do. So just kind of push this down here. And now that I have those in place, I'm going to take this lid, and as we kind of push down, that's going to cause it to bite down into the wire. So again, just double check, make sure they're in the same grooves that they need to be. And what you can do is actually take a set of pliers and just kind of crimp this down to where it's flush. You might take a little pressure and kind of work it all over it. And that should splice into our wires. So I'll go ahead and get our grommet put back in, and then I'm going to hop over to the other side and I'll show you the connections that we make over there. Now on the passenger side, we made our right turn signal, which is our green wire. I connected that to the green and blue just like we did on the driver's side. Now, as far as the brown wire, our marker light, that's going to go to the gray and purple wire. So go ahead and make those connections, and then you can go ahead and zip tie those up so they're nice and clean once you have them all snipped into place. Now we need to mount our module up so it's not rattling around as we're driving, and you want to find a nice spot to where it's not going to interfere with anything. And we have those plastic trays that sit here, and this portion right here is kind of flat. There's a grid underneath, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my double-sided tape and I'm going to just put one strip on there now, and that's going to eliminate any plastic to plastic, any rattling that might occur. And then what it will do is I have zip ties kind of looped around. You will need to use the smaller ones just because the holes are a little bit smaller, but we'll go ahead and get this mounted up. So just kind of route this under here, press it on there, and then we can go ahead and zip tie it up. And that's going to hold it in place for the lifespan of the vehicle and the wiring. Now all of our extra wire, we can go ahead and just zip tie up out of the way. Just make sure that you still have that clearance for that tray to go in. So I've routed that insulated wiring over here and just used the large zip ties to go around it and just made my way over to this one. Now our wiring bracket's going to sit here, but before I get my wiring bracket mounted up, I'm going to get my wiring all done. And this little screw here is going to back out, which just cinches around the wire to kind of create a watertight seal. And you'll have two Phillips heads. Now you're going to loosen both of these. That's what keeps the actual plug or the internal piece of it in place. But we're going to want to loosen that up and get that out to make the connections. And then it's going to look like this. So what I'm going to do before making the connection is take this portion of the plug and slide it up the wire, just kind of get it out of the way. That way when we make our connections, it'll all go together. So if you need to, you can just kind of pull this up a little bit. We'll grab these wires here and we're going to strip them back enough to make connections into these plates. And we're just going to back this out with a screwdriver, Phillips head here, and that plate should drop. Sometimes they hang, but make it wide enough to where you can put that stripped wire in there, and then you're going to tighten that down to where it's nice and taut. You don't want it, you know, damaging the wire, so really just make it snug to where that wire's not going to come out. So I'm going to go ahead and make the connections here, and then I'll show you where I put them all. So I've made my last connection there. Now there are colors that are imprinted on this. Do not follow that. In fact, in the instruction manual, there's a really good reference. So if you need to look at this a little bit more, you can check your instruction manual, but you're basically using your keyway here as your reference point. So from there, I just went clockwise. From the keyway, we'll go blue, then green, then black, brown, yellow, and white. Now your purple one's going to go in that center one there. So with all of those nice and taut, and you know, all my connections are good here, we can go ahead and slide this in. Now there is a slot where that keyway goes at the 6 o'clock position, so just make sure you line that up, and it should go in nice and easy here. And once you have that sitting flush with the rest of the plug there, you can go ahead, push your thumb in there, just kind of keep pressure on it, and then you can tighten these two back down. Now I'm going to backfill mine with dielectric grease, and this is just going to prevent moisture from causing any damage long term on our plug, so you can just go heavy on it here and just fill it all. You can also cover the plug too if you want before putting it in place, but this is going to keep that moisture from really causing any damage. It's just prolong the life of the plug, really. And then what I'm going to do is take some electrical tape and just wrap all this again, just to kind of give it a little bit more of a watertight seal, just prolonging the life of the plug. With the included hardware, I went ahead and mounted our bracket, and the bracket has a little splice on it in the middle to run the wires through it, so that way you can get this in place. And this is slotted, so you can adjust the angle. I went ahead and kind of made it to where this opens back and then just kind of tilted this, and that way it's easy to plug in, but also we'll have clearance from anything as far as heat shield goes. Now we'll be doing some trimming, and if you need to later on, you can always adjust the angle of the plugs at. Now before I get everything put back as far as fascia and everything else, we're going to want to test to make sure that our wiring's working. So you can go ahead and take your fuse and put that in the fuse holder and cap it up. Now we're going to be testing ours using a 7-pole tester. The other way that you'd want to test is by hooking it up to your trailer and having someone check all the light sequences as you run through them on the vehicle to make sure that they're corresponding. Right now I have my running lights on. I then have my left turn signal, my right turn signal, and then finally my brakes. And you can also see that we have our constant light, and that's going to be our 12-volt power, so that's a good sign. Now we have our sensor here, and this is for your kick panel to open up your hatch, and this is going to mount up to this bracket, but we do have some clearance issues, so we're going to be trimming a little bit on this. And to make it a little bit easier, we'll just go ahead and where it's attached here, we can just go ahead, pinch this center one, and then the wand itself, we're going to want to make sure we don't damage it, so you can just kind of pull it out from these clips. Mark this out with a nice painter's tape line, just to kind of keep it nice and even and a clean line for me to follow, but also to kind of give you an idea where we're cutting out. And this is just going to give us more access for our hand as well as our receiver. So if you have a Dremel, this works really well, pretty much any cutting tool. So just cut this out, and again, make sure that your wand is out of the way, and we'll just go ahead and get this knocked out. I'm just going to go back with my file and knock down any burrs. And also, since your hand's going to be reaching up there, anything that's sharp, you're going to want to soften that. That way you're not cutting your hand as you're reaching up there. And once you have this file down nice and clean, you can go ahead and put the kick wand back in these little snaps here. And then we're going to be using the existing push pin fasteners that we took off. Now originally there was 5 on this, but we will just be using the 3. And then once you have these in place, you're also going to want to make sure to plug it back in. Our gravel guard also needs to be trimmed out to allow our hitch receiver to be in place, as well as our wiring. And it kind of follows this interesting little curve. I think this is for a factory hitch. So we'll be cutting it off on these tabs, and then just kind of follow this around this mounting point, straight line over and then down. So the width is going to be where these 2 segments are. So go ahead and you can cut that out. Now this one does have this heat shield attached to it, so definitely make sure you're getting any sharp edge. That way you're not cutting your hand as you're reaching up there. But go ahead, get all those burrs knocked out. And then really all that's left to do is get our fascia put back in the reverse order. Now something you're going to want to make sure you do is you have your PDC sensor. That's the one that we unplugged from the fascia. So get the fascia close enough to plug that in, and then you'll go ahead and get it all put back together. Now after getting everything up, it's kind of tough here to actually have clearance to our plug at a good angle and have this open. So you may need to do a little bit of excess trimming compared to what the instructions mentioned to us. So trim as necessary. Just make sure you find where that kick wand sensor is and you're not damaging that. Back to sitting flush, so we're better there. Now also too, you're going to be able to kind of adjust your plug, but you're going to want to make sure that this opens up all the way, and if you need to, you can bend up this heat shield a little bit just to give you a little bit more clearance. And that was a look and installation of the Stealth Hitch Trailer Hitch receiver on a 2019 BMW X7.